This is part 2 of our discussion of Chapter 11 on input-output handling and exception handling. So first we're going to talk a little about command line arguments. You can run a Java program by typing a command at the prompt. This is called invoking it from the command line. You can add extra information for your program for initial input. So you can start a program, for example, Java, which is the keyword to run the Java interpreter, program class -v input.dat. The program receives the strings -v and input.dat as command line arguments, and you can use this to build automated tools. Your program receives its command line parameters in the args parameter of the main. We've been passing these in, but haven't been using them. In the example, args is an array of 2 containing the strings -v and input.dat. So, example, a program that encrypts a file could take the input file and the encrypt text for the output file, and that way, if you ran it, it would encrypt the input and drop it in output.txt, and you could have a -d flag to say decrypt instead of encrypt. Pretty simple and pretty useful. This is an example of using a very simple cipher. So now we're going to move on to exception handling, throwing exceptions. When something goes bad in your program, there are ways to deal with it. Exception handling provides a flexible mechanism for passing control from the point of error to a special handler so you don't have to do too many gymnastics. When you detect an error, throw an exception to signal an exception condition. If someone tries to withdraw too much money from a bank account, for example, you could throw an illegal argument exception. And the way you do it is creating a new exception object of the various types, all defended from exception, and then throw an exception. When an exception is thrown, the method terminates immediately and goes in unless there's an exception handler. This is kind of like a circuit breaker. So here's the way to throw an exception. Most exceptions can be constructed with an error message. You say new, throw new illegal argument, and a message. This line after it will never get executed because the exception changes the flow. So there are dozens and dozens of different types of exceptions for different things. The most general type is exception, which you probably should never use. You should actually use more specific. Every exception should be handled somewhere in your program. Otherwise, things just run out of control. Place the statements that can cause an exception inside a try block and the handler inside a catch clause. So think of it this way. Try these operations, and if any exceptions are thrown, catch the exceptions here. Now we can say which type of exception we want to catch and ignore the others, or you can go in terms of increasing generalness. 3 exceptions may be thrown in the try block. The scanner constructor can throw a file not found exception in the example above. Scanner.next can throw a no such element exception, and the integer.parseInt can throw a number format exception. If any of these exceptions is actually thrown, then the rest of the instructions in the try block will be seen. What happens when each exception is thrown? If a file not found exception is thrown, then the catch clause is executed because file not found is a descendant of IO exception. If you want to show the user a different message for a file not found expression, you must place the catch clause before the clause for an IO exception. If a number format exception occurs, then the second catch is executed, and similarly, if a no such exception is caught, the third one will be caught. Any other exception will remain until it is caught. Each catch clause contains a handler. Our example just informed the user of a problem. Often, it's better to give the user another chance or do something else. When you throw an exception, you can provide your own message string. So here we can say amount exceeds balance. You should only catch exceptions you can handle. If you can't handle them, let them bubble up. So catching exceptions, here's the general syntax. You have try, and in it you have items that can throw exceptions, and you have catch, and you give the classes you want to catch. There are 3 major classes of exception. Internal errors, which are reported by descendants of the type error, such as out-of-memory error, descendants of runtime exceptions, such as index out of bounds, and all other exceptions are checked exceptions, indicate that something is going wrong for some external reason beyond your control. For example, an IO exception, your printer's off. Checked exceptions are due to external circumstances that the programmer cannot prevent. The unchecked exceptions are your fault. Fix them. Handle the checked exceptions in the same method that throws it. File, catch, file not found. Often the current method cannot handle the exception. Just tell your compiler you're aware of the exception. You want the method to terminate if the exception occurs. So you add a throws method to the header of the method. The throws clause signals to the caller that it may encounter an exception. Be on the lookout for it. The caller must decide to handle the exception or declare that it'll be thrown above it. Throw early, catch late is the best pattern. Throw an exception as soon as you discover a problem and catch it only where you can actually handle it. So similarly, we can throw multiple, indicate that a method will throw multiple exceptions. You must specify all checked exceptions that could occur. So be very careful here. If you can throw a file not found, you should be aware of it. Basically, you're informing the guy above you what could go wrong. Another thing you need to do is when you are done using certain resources, you need to close them, such as the print writer. So what you can use is try with resources statement. Try printer out equals new printer. Out.close is automatically closed. This is a function of using this special form of the try catch. If no exception occurs, out.close is called after write data. If an exception occurs, it still gets called. By using this block form, you guarantee that it will always be called. So try with resources looks like this. Try type 1 equals variable 1, etc. to create your resource. This code may throw exceptions which you can then catch.